The term European New Zealanders refers to New Zealanders of European descent. Most European New Zealanders are of British and Irish ancestry, with smaller percentages of other European ancestries such as Croatians, Germans, Poles, French, Dutch, Scandinavian and South Slav. The Maori term Pākehā is sometimes used as a synonym for European New Zealander. History. Cook claimed New Zealand for Britain on his arrival in 1769. The establishment of British colonies in Australia from 1788 and the boom in whaling and sealing in the Southern Ocean brought many Europeans to the vicinity of New Zealand. Whalers and sealers were often itinerant, and the first real settlers were missionaries and traders in the Bay of Islands area from 1809. Some of the early visitors stayed and lived with Maori tribes as Pākehā Māori. Often whalers and traders married Maori women of high status, which served to cement trade and political alliances as well as bringing wealth and prestige to the tribe. By 1830 there was a population of about 800 non-Maori, which included a total of about 200 runaway convicts and seamen. The seamen often lived in New Zealand for a short time before joining another ship a few months later. In 1839 there were 1,100 Europeans living in the North Island. Violence against European shipping, the ongoing musket wars between Maori tribes, cultural barriers and the lack of an established European law and order made settling in New Zealand a risky prospect. By the late 1830s the average missionary would tell you that many Maori were nominally Christian. Many of the Maori slaves that had been captured during the musket wars had been freed, and cannibalism had been largely stamped out. By this time, many Maori, especially in the north, could read and write Maori and to a lesser extent English. 1840 onwards, European migration has resulted in a deep legacy being left on the social and political structures of New Zealand. Early visitors to New Zealand included whalers, sealers, missionaries, mariners, and merchants, attracted to natural resources in abundance. They came from the Australian colonies, Great Britain and Ireland, Germany, France, Portugal, the Netherlands, Denmark, the United States, and Canada. In 1840 representatives of the British Crown signed the Treaty of Waitangi with 240 Maori chiefs throughout New Zealand, motivated by plans for a French colony at Takaroa and land purchases by the New Zealand Company in 1839. British sovereignty was then proclaimed over New Zealand in May 1840. Some would later argue that the proclamation of sovereignty was in direct conflict with the treaty, which in its Maori version had guaranteed sovereignty to the Maori who signed it. By the end of the 1850s, the European and Maori populations were of a similar size as immigration and natural increase boosted European numbers. Following the formalizing of British sovereignty, the organized and structured flow of migrants from Great Britain and Ireland began. Government-chartered ships like the Clipper Gananoque and the Glen Tanner carried immigrants to New Zealand. Typically, clipper ships left British ports such as London and travelled south through the central Atlantic to about 43 degrees south to pick up the strong westerly winds that carried the clippers well south of South Africa and Australia. Ships would then head north once in the vicinity of New Zealand. The Glen Tanner migrant ship of 610 tons made 2 runs to New Zealand and several to Australia, carrying 400 tons of passengers and cargo. Travel time was about 3 to 3.5 months to New Zealand. Cargo carried on the Glen Tanner for New Zealand included coal, slate, lead sheet, wine, beer, cart components, salt, soap and passengers' personal goods. On the 1857 passage, the ship carried 163 official passengers, most of them government-assisted. On the return trip, the ship carried a wool cargo worth £45,000. In the 1860s, discovery of gold started a gold rush in Otago. By 1860, more than 100,000 British and Irish settlers lived throughout New Zealand. The Otago Association actively recruited settlers from Scotland, creating a definite Scottish influence in that region, while the Canterbury Association recruited settlers from the south of England, creating a definite English influence over that region. In the 1860s, most migrants settled in the South Island due to gold discoveries and the availability of flat, grass-covered land for pastoral farming. The low number of Māori and the absence of warfare gave the South Island many advantages. It was only when the New Zealand Wars ended that the North Island again became an attractive destination. In the 1870s, the MP Julius Vogel borrowed millions of pounds from Britain to help fund capital development such as a nationwide rail system, lighthouses, ports and bridges, and encouraged mass migration from Britain. By 1870, the non-Maori population reached over 250,000. Other smaller groups of settlers came from Germany, Scandinavia, and other parts of Europe as well as from China and India, but British and Irish settlers made up the vast majority, and did so for the next 150 years. Census statistics. The 2013 official census had 2,969,391, a 74.0% identify as European. The general census of New Zealand population was taken November to December 1851. Subsequent censuses were taken in 1858, 1861, 1864, 1867, 1871, 1874, 1878 and 1881, and thereafter at 5-yearly intervals until 1926. The table shows the ethnic composition of New Zealand population at each census. Since the early 20th century, Europeans are still the largest ethnic group in New Zealand. The proportion of the total New Zealand population has been decreasing gradually since the 1916 census. The 2006 census counted 2,609,592 European New Zealanders. Most census reports do not separate European New Zealanders from the broader European ethnic category, which was the largest broad ethnic category in the 2006 census. Europeans comprised 67.6% of respondents in 2006 compared with 80.1% in the 2001 census. The apparent drop in this figure was due to statistics. New Zealand's acceptance of New Zealander as a distinct response to the ethnicity question, and the placement of it within the other ethnic category, along with an email campaign asking people to give it as their ethnicity in the 2006 census. In previous censuses, these responses were counted belonging to the European New Zealanders group, and Statistics New Zealand plans to return to this approach for the 2011 census. 11% of respondents identified as New Zealanders in the 2006 census, well above the trend observed in previous censuses, and higher than the percentage seen in other surveys that year. In April 2009, Statistics New Zealand announced a review of their official ethnicity standard, citing this debate as a reason, and a draft report was released for public comment. In response, the New Zealand Herald opined that the decision to leave the question unchanged in 2011 and rely on public information efforts was rather too hopeful, and advocated a return to something like the 1986 approach. This asked people which of several identities apply to you, instead of the more recent question, what ethnic group do you belong to? Alternative terms Pākehā. The term Pākehā, the etymology of which is unclear, is used interchangeably with European New Zealanders. The 1996 census used the wording New Zealand European in the ethnicity question. However, the word Pākehā was subsequently removed after what Statistics New Zealand called a significant adverse reaction to its use to identify ethnicity. In 2013, the New Zealand Attitudes and Values study carried out by the University of Auckland found no evidence that the word was derogatory, although only 14% of the overall respondents chose to identify as Pākehā, with the remainder preferring New Zealander. New Zealand European or simply Kiwi. Palagai. The term Palagai, pronounced Palangi, is Samoan in origin and is used in similar ways to Pākehā, usually by people of Samoan or other Pacific Island descent. British and Irish New Zealanders. For residents of citizens that originate from New Zealand, see New Zealanders in the United Kingdom. See also British people, Irish people. The New Zealand 2006 census statistics reported citizens with British, English, Scottish, Irish, Welsh and Celtic origins. Historically, a sense of Britishness has figured prominently in the identity of many New Zealanders. As late as the 1950s, it was common for New Zealanders to refer to themselves as British, such as when Prime Minister Keith Holyoake described Sir Edmund Hillary's successful ascent of Mount Everest as the British race and New Zealand on top of the world. New Zealand passports described nationals as British subject and New Zealand citizen until 1974, when this was changed to New Zealand citizen. While European identity predominates political discourse in New Zealand today, the term British is still used by some New Zealanders to explain their ethnic origins. Others see the term as better describing previous generations. For instance, journalist Colin James referred to we ex-British New Zealanders in a 2005 speech. It remains a relatively uncontroversial descriptor of ancestry. Place names in New Zealand of European origin. There are many places in New Zealand named after people and places in Europe, especially the United Kingdom and the Netherlands, as a result of the many English, Scottish, Welsh, Irish, Dutch and other European settlers and explorers. These include the name New Zealand itself, as described below, along with several notable cities and regions. New Zealand. In 1645, Dutch cartographers renamed the land Nova Zealandia after the Dutch province of Zeeland. British explorer James Cook subsequently anglicised the name to New Zealand. Auckland. Both the city and region, as well as the former province, are named after George Eden, Earl of Auckland, whose title comes from the town of West Auckland, Durham, in England. Canterbury, the region, and former province, are named after Canterbury, England. Christchurch. The original name of the city, Christchurch, was decided prior to the ship's arrival at the association's first meeting, on the 27th of March 1848. The exact basis for the name is not known. It has been suggested that it is named for Christ Church, in Dorset, England, for Canterbury Cathedral, or in honour of Christ Church, Oxford. The last explanation is the one generally accepted. Dunedin comes from Dunedin, the Scottish Gaelic name for Edinburgh, the Scottish capital. Wellington, both the city and region, as well as the former province, are named after Arthur Wellesley, 1st Duke of Wellington, whose title comes from the town of Wellington, Somerset, in England.